Joining me today on Flint Rocks is legendary Springsteen fan Dan French. Dan is the co-host of the Springsteen-based podcast, The E Street Cafe, alongside Mike and Jeff. He's also the author of the book Grab Your Ticket and Your Suitcase, recounting his adventures following Springsteen on tour across the decades. Welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Hey, Jamie, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
You're more than welcome. So I first wanted to ask you, what kind of music were you interested in when you were younger? What was the first sort of awakening to music?
I first started listening to, I guess, top 40 radio in the early 70s. I'm 67 now. So it was stuff like, the things I remember are things like, I vividly remember, I think it was a hit at the time, Band of Gold by Frida Payne. A sort of wonderful sort of soul classic. And but very quickly, my main focus was on bands like T-Rex. For a long time, that was my big thing in the early 70s. I got also my first concert. I went to see T-Rex. Very lucky, around the time of Electric Warrior and all of that. And then I moved on to music like David Bowie, Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin. Or that kind of thing, again, going through the 70s. And it wasn't until probably the later 70s I went to college. And of course, all the punk and new wave stuff happened then.
Yeah.
And then that became my thing. I discovered John Peel's radio show. Previously, I'd been listening to people like Alan Freeman on the radio, which was very different, but equally fun. But Peely's stuff was so fresh, and there was all this exciting new music. So I went through a lot of the sort of punk and new wave stuff, and it was around the same time that a college friend played me Bruce. So that was where my Bruce story started.
And what was the first Bruce song that you heard?
I can tell you absolute clarity. It was "Born to Run" itself, the title track, and interestingly, I was given a mixtape, a compilation tape, back in the day when that was what you did to share music. And so I was just playing this cassette, which was mostly punk and new wave. And it had this one track, Born to Run, on, which I liked a lot. Thought that was great. But for some reason, it didn't spur me to sort of rush out and get more. I'm not quite sure why, but it took a little while. In fact, the same friend also asked me to go and buy Darkness for him, because we were at college in Lancaster, and I went down to London on a shopping trip. Bought him Darkness, but I was actually more excited by a new album by a band called Dire Straits, which we'd seen them live, and thought, oh wow, hey, Neil will really want this. So I grabbed 2 copies. In fact, I almost forgot to buy Darkness. I was so excited by this new release, their debut album, and then Darkness was kind of like an afterthought. So it wasn't really until, again, third time round, the same friend, bless him, he was a great guitar player. He had an electric guitar in his room. He could play along with Bruce's music, and he got hold of a bootleg. It was the Roxy 78. So we're talking, late 78, early 79. And he was playing along to Candy's Room, the live version from the Roxy, and that really served to kind of focus my attention on the musicianship. And I thought, wow, now I get it. That was my moment.
I think a lot of people have sort of said that with sort of Bruce's live music. And I was doing a previous podcast with Paul Rappaport. So Paul was an A&R man for Columbia. And we were talking about Darkness, and we were saying that Darkness as a studio album, I love it. It's probably, for me, if I was rating Bruce albums, it's my second favorite Bruce album after Nebraska. But I always prefer listening to the Paramount 2009 live version, because I feel by the time that they got to that point in Bruce's career, they had honed everything. There's just something slightly, I hate to use the word dull like with the production. There's something slightly underproduced, but not in a great way, for the Darkness album for myself.
You're absolutely right. I think Bruce himself said sometime later that he looked back on it with a little bit of regret, because he said something along the lines of, talking about the production. He said, I think I underplayed and oversang, something like that. And so exactly my point I was going to make is, like, as you say, come 2009, when he did the Paramount version, it was his opportunity to kind of like redo it the way he wanted it. And for me, those are the definitive versions. I always point people to that. So the album is great. It's my favorite album. But yeah, go and listen to the Paramount versions. They are just, superb.
Exactly. And one of my favorite concert moments was at Wembley 2013, being able to hear Darkness front to back. And it was the first time that I got to hear Racing in the Streets, and sort
Right.
of being stood there in the pit, and just that coda at the end of the song is just it, it's one of my favorite pieces of music, and there's just so much emotion that just goes into that, and it's always a highlight. I mean, my wife, we went to see the Wembley 2024 the first night, and that was her second Bruce show. So she'd come with me. We got together in 2018, so we had to wait until 2023 to go see him at Hyde Park, and that was great. That was really good, and it was fine for her because she was getting all the hits, and then there was a couple of rarities. For me, it was getting things like Ketty's Back. Quite funny. Mary's Place is one of her favorite songs, and Bruce hadn't really been mixing the set list up in 2023. But by the time he got to Europe, he was playing Mary's Place. That was one of the highlights of the night for us. And for her, when it started raining, I mean, me, I'd seen Bruce countless times beforehand, and he was thinking, okay, here's Mary's Place. It's a great song, but uh, I'm wanting for something new or something rarer. But then when we saw him at Wembley in 2024, we got, like I say, Racing, and that was just looking around that stadium at that point. It's just, and I mean, you've seen Racing countless times. I've seen it 3 or 4 times. It's it's just an amazing experience because you've got the storytelling, and then you've got the build up to that amazing coda, and then everybody's sort of transfixed. It's just one of those unique moments in a Bruce concert that it's just
It really,
beyond special.
it is. You're so right, and it's my favorite Bruce song. If I'm asked what's my favorite Bruce song, and also I always give it as an example. If people say what's so special about the E Street Band, I say, well, listen
Yep.
to Racing in the Street live, and as you say,
Yep.
that coda is like, it's like almost like Bruce kind of stepping back and saying, look at what my band can do. And because they're all, it's like the interplay between them, the guitars and the keyboards and everything. One of the things I marvel at, and as you say, I've been lucky enough to see it quite a few times, is that Roy Bittan plays his part differently every single time. It's never exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
Stevie used to do the same thing back when they used to play Wreck on the Highway, and he had to do a little guitar solo at the end. But it's much more noticeable with Racing the Street, and you just want that coda to go on forever because
Yep.
it's just sort of, yeah. I mean, yeah. If I have to choose my favorite moments of E Street Band music, it can just be down to that coda.
And I think that's the thing for me. I collect the Nugs archive releases. So Bruce, on just about a monthly basis, he will put out an archive show. And my wife will say, she'll look at the set list with me and she'll say, oh, well, you've heard that song 50 million times. And I'll be like, no, this is going to be completely different because this version of Racing, the coda goes on for 5 minutes instead of 3 minutes here, or we've got 7 minutes here. And it just, that's the uniqueness with Bruce and his performance. It's you get different feels from a Bruce show. And that's what I wanted to run with you because, like I say, I believe your first show was on the River Tour.
Yes.
So that was your kind of your entry level. And then last couple of shows would have been on the 2025 shows. And we would talk about sort of Bruce delivering narratives. He tells stories and bits and pieces that I've seen hundreds of different bands. And there's nobody that comes close to when I leave a Bruce sort of performance where and this is what me and Paul Rappaport was sort of talking about. He gave a story where he said that he was really struggling to get Bruce played by a particular DJ who was thought Bruce was overhyped, and it was height of the Born in the USA tour, and he took him to see him. And there was Jungle Land, and Bruce was stood on the piano, and he turned and looked at this guy, and this guy was literally shaking. And after the show, Paul offered to take this DJ backstage to meet Bruce, and he said, "No, I need to get out. I need to spread the word," because he got it. And I think that's the thing with me. I've got friends of mine that have sort of said, "Why are you obsessed with this guy? What is it that he does which is different to any other artists out there?" And I've got one of my best friends. This took me sort of about 5-6 years, but he's now starting to get it. And that took sort of Nebraska and the whole hype that we've just had with the Nebraska movie, to be able to understand sort of what we talk about Bruce and having different eras, and then understand him right. You've got this whole Nebraska era and what actually went on in his life, and the film. I think the film's fantastic. Personally, there's a few little inconsistencies. There's little bits and pieces that bother me, which are more on sort of like a technical level and more on what I'd probably consider like a geeky little level, and knowing bits and pieces about one conversations and like the timeline being moved around. But you
Yeah.
look at it as it's a piece of art. It's telling a story. It's not a documentary. It's not a docudrama. It's fiction based on reality.
Yeah.
But that was really interesting that showed sort of just before sort of he hit that peak. And I suppose it's good now to pivot back sort of yourself. So we're talking 1981.
Yep.
First Bruce show for you. Can you tell us the story? Because I think it's quite an interesting story. And I will plug Dan's book now. So Dan's book, Grab Your Ticket in Your Suitcase. Fantastic book. You can pick it up on Amazon. You can pick it up on Badlands. I read it in a matter of days because it was just fantastic, because you feel like you're going along a journey with Dan across the decades. There's some really interesting pieces there. Mike from the E Street Calf podcast adds a nice little interlude there about some of the adventures on the Born in the USA tour. And it goes bang up to date up until the 2025 shows, which you can access by a little QR code in the back of the book. So it's a fantastic book, but I'd like if you could just tell the listeners sort of your first Bruce show experience, because that's a really interesting little story.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, that's a really kind summary, and yeah, that's great. Yeah, it was unusual, I have to say, because it was, on the one hand, it was very much an unexpected event. Around March '81, we were waiting for the UK tour originally, on the original Rover tour, and then Bruce got sick. He'd been in the States and he got sick, and so big parts of the European tour got rearranged. Shows got postponed, and new extra shows got added. So the upshot was that I was thinking, oh, that's a shame. I was really sort of just about, sort of psyched up and ready to go and see him at Brighton, which would have been originally the first show, just a few days away. I thought, oh, I'm going to have to wait. And then because I'd been doing my fanzine, I did this Point Blank fanzine at the time. Luckily, I'd made some pen pals, one of whom was this girl in Germany. And we just corresponded by post, because that's all we could do in those days. And to my great surprise, one day I just got a letter in the post from her with a ticket for Bruce at Frankfurt, and a note just saying, "See you at such and such hotel." And I thought, oh my goodness, okay, it looks like I haven't got to wait. I'm going to go and see Bruce in Germany. I looked at the calendar, realized it was only a few days away. And I thought, oh, well, okay, how am I going to get there? Because I was out of work at the time. I had nothing going on except the fanzine. And I thought, well, I'm just going to have to hitchhike. I can't afford a train or anything else. So I hitchhiked and made it just in time. I still can't believe how I did that, the timing. I arrived at Frankfurt the evening before, and I was looking around for any kind of sign of the thing happening. And finally, I did find the venue, and there's this massive sign saying Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. I thought, oh yes, I'm in the right place at the right time. But then I couldn't find my friend, because I went to the hotel to look for her. And again, no mobile phones in those days, no other ways to communicate. I just had to leave a note at the reception. And I thought, well, I can't afford a room. This is a pretty fancy hotel. It's like a 5-star place. And I didn't have time to go hunting around looking for somewhere else, because it was getting dark and getting late. And I was exhausted. So I just said, I realized there's a park across the road. I've got my sleeping bag. I'm just going to kip down in the park. It'll be fine. So I left her a note and told her, I'm in the park. I'll see you see you tomorrow for the show. And I go and crash out in the park. Little did I know that my friend was round the corner from the reception in the lobby with pretty much the E Street Band and crew, because it was Max's birthday. And she was sitting there, she'd been sitting there holding my fanzine. And Clarence, I think it was, came up and immediately spotted this, attractive young woman, and starts to chat to her, and then realized that, hang on, she's got something to do with us guys. So they all kind of congregate around her to celebrate Max's birthday. And I'm just asleep in the park and totally oblivious to this. But it's funny because after a few drinks, she gets the message from the reception and realizes that I'm outside. And she went back to Clarence and said, "Hey, Clarence, we've got to go and find my friend Dan. He's in the park." And so, in the small hours or whenever, the story goes that she and Clarence went around the park calling, "Dan French, come out tonight." And I slept through it all, which kind of makes it more fun in a way. But can you imagine if I'd woken up to that? It would have been it was surreal enough. The next day, when I wake up, tired and bleary, and I go to meet her for the first time. So, "Oh, hi, nice to meet you. Any chance I can borrow your shower? I've been hitchhiking or whatever." And she just says, "Dan, great, you're here. We got to go and wake Clarence up." Like, what? I'm not even awake, and this totally surreal moment. And we did. She took me to meet Clarence, and I thought, is this really happening? And we basically had to wake him up like over 3 times that day because he just wasn't ready. He'd had quite a hangover after the Max's party. He was always party central, but we got to meet him. I got to shake the hand of this huge guy, and I thought, oh my God, it's real. This is starting to become real. And that day just went on from there. In as much as we finally woke him up and had a chat with him in his room, and he told us to meet downstairs when they would go for sound check. So we were hanging out in the lobby. We saw some of the crew, gathering, and saw some of the band gathering. And I said to my friend who met them all the previous night, I said, "Well, it looks like everyone's here except Clarence and Bruce." She says, "No, Bruce is over there." I was like, "Oh, that little guy sort of hunched up in a chair." Yes, I imagine him to be kind of like larger than life, as you would from the stage experience. But he was just sort of by himself, very withdrawn and thoughtful. I guess just thinking about the night ahead. Anyway, the lift doors opened finally, and Clarence appeared, resplendent in his black suit, and I kind of like, right, okay, I'm here. We can start now. So everyone gathered, and they were about to jump in a little minibus to go across the road because there were, you could see the venue. It was that close. It was just a short distance away. But Bruce said, no, let's walk. He jumped over like a little temporary barrier that had been erected nearby. And he'd had his brown leather jacket slung over his shoulder, and it fell off. He didn't realize. I'm walking right behind him, so I picked up his jacket and said, "Hey, Bruce, you dropped your jacket." And he was like, "Oh, okay, thanks, man." Totally unaware he'd done that. That was my first time ever speaking to Bruce. And we get to the hall, and I think, oh, this has been really nice. They're going to leave us, and they're going to go into the sound check now. And Clarence just kind of ushers me and my friend and says, "No, these guys are with me." And he kind of ushers us in, takes us under his wing, finds his man, and says, "Give these guys some passes so they don't get any trouble." And I slap a couple of backstage passes on us. Never had one of those before. I'm like, wow, this is real VIP treatment. And then we get to experience the sound check, which I'd heard about as being legendary. And that's exactly what we'd heard about. The band got on stage. They began playing Hungry Heart instrumentally while Bruce wanders around and around the hall, checking the sound from every angle. And so they're playing Hungry Heart for quite a while. My first impression was, this sounds pretty perfect to me immediately. I don't think, he doesn't need to spend a lot of time on this, but he spent, a fair bit of time doing that. And then eventually he joined the band and, strapped a guitar on, and they're playing Prove It All Night together. So that was the first time I got to see Bruce playing with the band. And I was surprised because it was quite laid back. And I thought, I thought he was going to be more kind of, energetic and powerful. And then I realized, of course, he's pacing himself. He's got to, this is a long sound check and he's still got 3 hours to play. So eventually they're happy with that. And we just go away and just kind of like, our heads are spinning and thinking, is this just happening? And eventually it's time for the show. And so after all that, we have an amazing 3-hour show. I remember he started with Factory, and everyone just went nuts. They weren't expecting people in Germany and Europe generally to react the way that they did in the States, but it was an amazing reception. We were totally exhausted after 3 hours. He played Point Blank that night, which I thought was a nice touch. I don't know if it had anything to do with the fact that I mentioned a fanzine, but who knows? It was just really nice. And then at the end, I was, just sort of again head spinning, and I said to my friend, "Well, what do we do now?" And go for a drink somewhere. And she said, "We have backstage passes, Dan. We go and hang around backstage." So we did, and then after a while, John Lando came out, and he's talking to reporters, and people are coming and going. I have to say, there wasn't anything fancy. It was very basic. You're talking like a concrete bunker, nothing special laid on, but we're just happy to be there. And then with thinking, well, this is going on for a while. So maybe like an hour later, Bruce emerged from having a shower or something. His hair was all slicked back, and meets a few people. And then he just happens to be walking our direction. So I think, well, you've got to seize the moment. Stick my hand out and say, "Hey, Bruce, thanks for the show." And Rena said, "Oh, this is the guy that did the fanzine." And I'd also happened to meet a couple of friends because a couple of other friends from the UK. There had been a coach trip laid on from the UK for that particular show, and a couple of people we'd met earlier realized that we had passes and said, "Oh, can you give these to Bruce?" So I had a couple of little things to hand over. So I gave him, these are some little gifts for you. And we got a photo. Thankfully, my friend had a camera. I didn't even own a camera at that point. 1981. Had an old-fashioned camera, snapped a pic of me and Bruce. So we got that to kind of prove it, because nobody will ever believe this, And that was just the first night of several, because I thought, well, okay, that's it. I'm going to go home, and that was great, but it's time to go back to the UK. Ended up seeing another show in Munich a couple of days later, and 2 more shows in Paris on the way home, which are sort of like 4 shows that I had totally were not on my radar at all at that point. And that's all detailed in the book.
That's fantastic. So were there any highlights song-wise that you got? So obviously you spoke about starting with Factory, which is always really cool as an opener because you get those pounding drums. And it's quite a dark way to open as well, because we kind of think of sort of like Ties That Bind, something like that, which would really get everybody up and going. But Factory is it's a downbeat song to start with.
It is an unusual one to open with, yeah. And I guess it showed how comfortable Bruce was with, if you like, almost kind of like testing this, what he might have considered to be a non-English speaking audience.
Yeah.
Although, I suppose, to be fair, Frankfurt was very much a kind of an American base. Like, there were a lot of GIs there. It was very it's kind of an international hub, and that probably helped. So he probably thought he could stretch things out a bit. Yeah, so just, the very first thing you hear is Max's pounding drums and Danny's keyboards. And it's a very unusual song, Factory. What a very strange way to start. Yeah, you're expecting some to sort of blast out into something. And it probably was Prove It All Night Next or something like that. Point Blank, definitely a highlight. And finally, I think pretty sure we had, as he did a lot of shows around that time, Rockin' All Over the World.
Yeah,
very much obviously a nod to here we are, we're Americans abroad, and you've got a real sense of that this is a band who are really confident. They're going to conquer this on this tour. They really are. After all the uncertainty of 1975, when all the hype and Bruce's disappointment with the first Hammersmith show and that kind of thing. And then, of course, they never came back, which everyone thought they would do on the Darkness tour. They kind of skipped that altogether. And it was several years later that they finally come back. And I was lucky enough to go to, all the UK shows, because although I was out of work, I had the fanzine, and that just basically meant I could sell copies, and it would pay basically sort of day by day expenses, just enough to survive. But the thing I remember over that period is that, yeah, especially by the time they got to Wembley, this is absolutely a sort of a conquering tour. They have solidified and sealed their relationship with Europe. It was a very, very special time.
I think for me, listening to sort of bootlegs, that everybody says like it doesn't get better than like 1978, because I think a lot of people have got those personal connections with those radio broadcasts. So you've got your Roxys, you've got your Agoras, you've got the Fox Theatres, which those darkness shows were intense. But for me, the difference between them and the River shows, well, the River shows, he had more material. So you're going to get longer shows. And then he was able to adapt the narratives of those shows by, like we said, starting with Factory one night, which gives you quite a sort of dark start. And the way that he's got different sort of, you've got a double album with the River, that you've got that many songs that you can bring in. So even bringing a song in, one of my personal favorite songs is Drive All Night.
Yeah.
Which there were some beautiful versions that you got on sort of the River tour. So I've always been partial when people sort of say to me, sort of listening to sort of back to bootlegs, I've got favorites in every tour, but there's something about that original River tour, which it was the band on the cusp of something really, really special, and having that wealth of material. And you can really see when you're listening to shows in sort of like the early 80s, then compared to the ones in sort of the 80s, like the shows at Wembley Arena that you're talking about, sort of 81. You're getting the debut of songs like Trapped, and you're getting different covers and bits and pieces like that, which just makes those the whole, for me, the whole tour something really, really special. And then Bruce goes away, and he comes back with Nebraska. So I presume at the time there, you would probably have thought that the River, which kind of highlights, and it was almost an album that was designed to highlight the band, that would be then going even more in that direction. But instead, he comes back with this stripped back, almost folky album. What were your sort of views on that when you started hearing through sort of the press and music magazines that we're going to be getting sort of an acoustic album?
You're right. I think we all thought, as I say, because very much my reaction was that, okay, now they've achieved what they set out to do. They've established their really strong fan base in Europe. We're basically just going to get more of the same. Maybe next year there'll be the River Part 2 or whatever. No one had any clues, even though in hindsight you can look at the songs that some of the stuff he was introducing, like Johnny Bye Bye. And he was obviously becoming more thoughtful. You even think about something like "Wreck on the Highway."
Yeah,
that kind of points the way, in one sense, towards some of the sort of fields and themes of Nebraska. It was I was lucky because there wasn't really still then any kind of network, and there wasn't a lot in the music press at all. It was very short notice. In fact, I think the first I heard of it, I'd established a contact with Roger Scott, the late great UK DJ at Capital Radio at the time, because big fan. He would always play Bruce on his shows. He was kind of like our man in the media, and then he had connections. He knew what was going on, and bless him, he would just sort of send me notes and things. And he sent me a note saying something like, "Hey Dan, new album coming next month. It's solo, acoustic, no E Street Band, exclamation mark, shock horror." And so I think that was one of the first times we thought, oh, goodness, this is really an about turn, a totally different thing. And then a few days later or a week later or something, he sent me a photocopy of the press release about it. So again, it was like, wow, okay, this is really happening. Not long to wait, getting very excited. And then I remember it was a weekday because I had to go to work, but I got the mail just before I went off to work, and I had a friend staying with me. And we've been talking about Bruce, of course, but at the weekend, but probably a Monday morning. And the mail came, and it was like a little jiffy bag, and all that was in it, and this is kind of funny in the context of Nebraska, was a cassette with no case, which is perfect. Well, of course, we didn't know that at the time, and it was a promo CBS tape, and I knew immediately who it was from. I guess it was from Roger Scott. And all he'd done was he got a really big, thick black marker, and he'd written over the label Nebraska. And then my knees went weak. You can imagine, it's like, oh my God, this is it. We've got an advanced tape. I'd heard about such things and then never experienced it. And so, okay, I'm going to be late for work. Grab my friend, shove it in the cassette player. I remember her first words, listening to the title track. It's a little bit depressing, isn't
it? Yep.
And because we had no idea what to expect. I thought, what would a solo acoustic Bruce sound like? All we had to go on was, you just think, okay, it's going to be a man with a guitar, maybe a harmonica, but we had no reference points really other than that. So it did take a bit of an adjustment to get used to. The same thing happened with The Ghost of Tom Joad, later on.
Yeah.
And even Devils and Dust to a degree. But yeah, I mean, I loved it. I mean, I lapped it up. And but I did think to myself very quickly, I don't see how we can do this live. I don't think, this isn't shouting out about the tour. There's no band on this. How is it good? How would it work with a band? And of course, we had to wait until 1984 to find out how at least some of the songs would work live with a band.
Because I think that's the thing as well. Like these days, you would have heard that he was in the studio trying out these songs in an electric fashion. Most people found out about like the electric Nebraska side of things almost decades later. And then I believe, just through sort of reading through my own bits and pieces, that there was a lot of sort of buzz around these Born in the USA kind of tracks that I think they'd been sort of mentioned by probably people in the press there, just to sort of say, right, go and listen to this. This is great. This is solo Bruce, but don't worry, we've got sort of electric Bruce to look forward to. And then you go on a complete 180 when you hear sort of Dancing in the Dark, which I could imagine was quite a cultural shock, sort of going from listening to the last bars of Open All Night, and then Reason to Believe, with Nebraska, and then you're going straight into MTV Bruce Dancing with Courtney Cox. When was the first time you heard Dancing? Was it on the radio? Did you see it on MTV?
I think that was also thanks to Roger Scott, bless him, because I would obviously listen to his show religiously, assuming that he would be the first one to sort of drop any news about Bruce. And I think he maybe trailed it and said, "Okay, today we're going to have the first playing on Capital Radio or whatever of the new Springsteen single." And I thought, wow, okay, exciting. And I think I probably tried to get a recorder ready to try and tape it on cassette. And I was taping. That's right. I was taping the show, and unfortunately, the tape was running out just as the song was playing. But so I got a little bit of it recorded, then I quickly flipped the tape over and recorded the end of it. And I missed a little bit of what Roger was saying, but friends rang me up basically and said, congratulations. And like, what do you mean? It's Roger dedicated the song to you. So bless him, he actually gave me a shout out on the air, which was lovely. And even though I missed it at the time, but I think I got a recording later. And it was like, yes, this is so different. There's synthesizers. It's got that weird drum sound. It sounded like nothing else he'd done before. Yep. But again, immediately you could tell I was absolutely sure this is going to be massive. This is so radio friendly. This is so perfect for MTV. We didn't know anything about a video at that point. But I just thought, yeah, now we're talking big time. This means there's going to be another band tour, which we were still thinking would be at the level of, Wembley Arena at biggest, or, Birmingham NEC, that kind of scale as where he'd left off. We really didn't know what was going to happen, quite how big it was going to get, but it made a big impact.
And then you've got the Born in the USA album, and then you've gone on the Born in the USA tour. So just talk me through what your thoughts are on sort of the Born in the USA album, because that's quite diversive for a lot of sort of Springsteen fans, especially fans that sort of were fans before and then you've got the fans that then have joined at that point. You talk to some old school fans, which are very much, they feel that there's a bit of sort of selling out on Bruce, that he's almost embracing everything that was going on within the charts there. It was at that point where Bruce said, yeah, I'm going to accept this. I'm just going to ride this wave. I'm going to see how big things can be. And it was obviously a massive album. It's one of my favorite albums because there's so much depth there as well. Once you look beyond sort of some of the production choices that can seem a bit dated now, you look at Born in the USA, even when you're looking at songs like Working on the Highway. I think My Hometown is a beautiful song, an absolutely beautiful song. There is a lot. I'm Going Down. I would always encourage people to check out sort of the bootlegs or even the Nugs releases of I'm Going Down, with the little stories that Bruce tells in advance about sort of relationships and sort of girlfriends at the time there. Cover Me is another big song. So what was your thoughts when you heard the album start to finish?
Yeah, as you say, there's all that variety on there. Even though it's kind of got a kind of uniform production feel overall, taking it song by song, there are a lot of different elements on there, and I think he must have put a lot of thought into that, as he always did. So you've got Born in the USA itself, which is, as we know, has been deconstructed and reconstructed so many times, probably more than any other song in his catalogue, because of course it got misunderstood, and as early as a couple of years later, Bruce wanted to set the record straight and start playing it acoustic to really focus on the lyrics. And that is, it's again, it's just the opposite of what so many people assumed. They only heard the title, they thought it was a flag-waving anthem, but it was basically condemning, America for the way it had treated the Vietnam veterans, and it's an angry song. And so it's kind of also the awakening of his political consciousness, which again very much you can trace back to the River Tour, especially in Europe, when he and Stevie went to East Berlin and began to realize what was going on in other countries, and how, very importantly, how America was viewed from the outside. So you've got all that in there, and then you've got, as you say, I love something like I'm Going Down. I think for a long time that was probably my favorite choice. And then frustratingly, he didn't play it live in Europe for a long time. I think I had to wait till something like about maybe like 2008 on the Magic Tour. Finally got to see him do that. I don't know why he didn't think it would work, because it's a real crowd pleaser, especially with the intro, as you say. No Surrender I liked a lot, and I was really interested when the first bootleg cassettes began circulating, that we realized that, he's done an acoustic version of this. That was fascinating, because it was a song that just seemed to demand the full band, full on energetic treatment, and of course that's what most people associate with it. And you're quite right about My Hometown as it's a beautiful way to end the album. It's kind of almost like, you can think of them as like bookends, Born in the USA and My Hometown, starting a story and finishing a story, so with a kind of an arc, if you like. And one of my favorites, was something that he tucked away on the B-sides, Shut Out the Light.
Yep.
Again, very much the Vietnam story. He probably thought, I can't have two like this on the album. I'll tuck it away on a B-side. But I mean, just that extraordinary image of, them touching down on the runway, and the guy's experiences, he just absolutely feeling traumatized. And this is entertainment. This is put out as popular music, and I think he had the bravery to say things like that. And you've got something as minimal, if you like, as I'm on Fire, which has obviously been a huge favorite and probably covered as much as Dancing in the Dark. If you look at the cover versions that there have been, that's something that really resonated with people. I'm not sure that some of the videos were that successful. I mean, I admired John Sayles for what he was trying to do, but I think they never really quite found their feet with some of the videos. Kind of feel experimental when you look back at them.
Yep.
And Bruce himself wasn't really comfortable with the camera either. So, but it was, thankfully, because it was the MTV era, it did give us a different dimension on things. And some people would hesitate to mention the remixes, the 12-inch remixes of the songs. That's a real Marmite thing for some people. But very important, I think, in getting Bruce into the clubs
Yep.
in early '85, and also I don't know if people remember that there was a hit single by a band called Big Daddy, and they did a kind of doo-wop, 50s style rearrangement of Dancing in the Dark, and that was a big hit. So that combined with the remixes and just everything gathering momentum at the time meant that they had to reevaluate the audience and the market for the shows they'd been planning for '85. They had originally planned to play indoors at Earl's Court, and then when everything took off big time in early '85, they realized that we're going to have to go bigger. We're going to have to go outdoors. And then before you know it, it's Wembley Stadium and a whole different scale of things. So there's a very big evolution in just, like sort of 12 months or less at that point.
Massively. And you can hear that in sort of those early 1984 shows where there's a lot of heavy Nebraska material in there. There was a mini Nebraska set to start sort of the shows off. And then by the time you get into Europe, you're lucky if you get in Atlantic City, and you maybe get in Johnny 99 or Open All Night. But one of my favorite chapters in Dan's book wasn't actually written by Dan. It was written by one of his co-hosts, Mike Saunders.
It's the best chapter.
Mike recounts sort of their adventures at Slane Castle. So that's in Ireland in 1985. And like I say, I fully recommend picking Dan's book up. And that chapter was very, very funny. There's a lot of adventures going on, and you were getting wound up by like the police officers, claiming tickets were fake and all sorts of bits and pieces like that. But I imagine that was the height, if you class of Bruce Mania. You've got Beatlemania, Bruce Mania 1985. Would you say Bruce got bigger than that? I mean, even now, sort of 2025, Bruce was everywhere last year, and the shows seem to be sort of event shows. But I don't know if it's just the change in sort of the music industry and bits and pieces, but I had friends that went to see him because it was the big thing to do. Like, this legend is in town, and especially going to Liverpool, there was a lot of talk, is McCartney going to be there? Obviously, he did turn up at the second night. Would you say, following Bruce, that 1985 was the peak, or has there been multiple peaks for him?
There probably have been multiple peaks, but that was the first real peak when he began playing stadiums and outdoors. I mean, Slane was just basically this massive field in front of a river, with 80,000 or something. I forget the numbers, a lot of controversy. But I mean, a whole different scale than previously. I mean, he has done, I think ever since he started playing stadium-sized places in Europe, that's kind of continued to a degree. You have to make an allowance, obviously, for some intervals in the '90s when things were different, and there was no E Street Band. But whenever there have been E Street Band performances, he's very rarely played indoors in the UK and in Europe generally, because I think, and yet ironically, it's as if the fan base has kind of shifted. I think they've acknowledged this themselves, that they consider that Europe and other parts, maybe even Australia or whatever, are now actually a kind of heartland for Bruce in terms of the really sort of hardcore fandom, and it's actually harder for them to sell anywhere other than a sort of 20,000 or smaller indoor arena in many parts of the States. So it's gone the other way around. But '85 was definitely a peak, and again, we thought that, okay, now this has happened, this is how it's always going to be, much as we thought 4 years earlier in '81. We kind of thought, how does he go back from this? And so it was very refreshing when, later on, 1996, Bruce brought Tom Joad tour to Europe, and he was playing theatres. And I remember thinking, I really didn't see that coming, even though I knew it was acoustic material. It was just almost unthinkable that he would be able to scale it down and have the kind of power to do that, knowing that his audience is there, but recognizing immediately the difference between an E Street Band show and anything else. Because I think the '92-'93 tour was also a big testing time, because it was a big band show, but it wasn't the E Street Band. And
Yeah.
for people who'd known the E Street Band previously, there was a lot of coming to terms with that, and I think a lot of division around that. A lot of people didn't accept that. The same thing happened with the Sega Sessions tour. People weren't always ready for that, even though it's something that you could really enjoy just for its own sake. But Bruce, I think, realized in the '90s that he could actually do both things. He could be small scale, do things on his own, experiment, try different things, but he could always return to the Street Band, and that's where you have the guaranteed stadium audiences. So yeah, different peaks along the way, but that was the first one, and that kind of established him. Even though, I mean, it's laughable really, because you can look at media today, and they'll show a picture of Bruce in 84, 85 with the bandana, the big flag and the muscles and everything, and that kind of image became the iconic image of him, which he's never really shaken off. So that's partly why he's still kind of a household name in a way, at least so it seems. But obviously, it was amplified by all the interaction with Trump last year.
Yeah,
I think if he hadn't gone that route, it might not have had such an impact. Again, like give the example that he was playing indoors in Manchester, and that was very significant, which you wouldn't have expected. And then you got the traditional outdoor stadium show at Liverpool. So yeah, it has been a bit of a roller coaster for him, and that's part of what's made it interesting over the years. Is that each tour and each album, you weren't quite sure what he was going to do next.
and I suppose that's where you flip round to then you've got Tunnel of Love that comes out, which is almost a solo album featuring guest appearances by the E Street Band. And it's almost going back to a Nebraska way of recording, because it's recording a lot in a home studio. And then the tour comes out, and obviously the tour, you've got people that have been moved around on the stage. Clarence, obviously his position's changed, and you've got Platty being brought to the front, and then you've got the whole sort of relationship side of things. And obviously out in Rome, they were caught on the balcony together. And then you've got the horns for the first time. So that must have been an interesting experience, sort of catching them on the Tunnel of Love tour. But again, though, when he came across from sort of in the US, he was playing a lot of Tunnel of Love material. When he came across to the UK, and sort of across Europe, a lot of that tended to get dropped. I don't think we got like Walk Like a Man, which is one of my favorite songs off of there. One Step Up, which One Step Up is top 5 Bruce songs for me. I absolutely adore that song. And now we're quite used to sort of different horn sections, and especially since 2013, you've got the E Street Horns that near enough go out on tour every time. I think it's only recently been 2016 that it's been more of a core E Street Band that's sort of been on tour. So yeah, what was 1988 sort of like, the shows like Bramall Lane and shows like that? What was the kind of feeling? Did you feel like the shows had evolved, that there was more of a narrative in them, or had that been lost between sort of coming across the pond?
Yes, it was much more of a changeable tour compared to, say, 1985, which was very much your standard stadium show in hindsight. And there were fewer of them. I was lucky in 1988 because I got to see a whole bunch of shows. And having missed out, as you mentioned earlier, on the more of the Nebraska material that he was doing in 1984 in the States, but didn't bring it over to Europe, when he started the 88 tour in America, I thought, right, I'm gonna go there, because it's like it's indoors, and I was fairly certain that it would be outdoors by the time he came here. And I anticipated that he's going to switch. Or at least it's going to shift, so that we might lose some of the subtle material that he would do indoors to that kind of audience. And true enough, that's what happened. So I very luckily did get songs like Walk Like a Man. I got to see 3 shows in the spring of '88 in the New York area, and it was different because also that there was a different light show, which you wouldn't really have been aware of so much outdoors in stadiums, but that really worked in a beautiful way indoors. And as you mentioned, moving the people around on stage, giving it very much obviously a very definite attempt to make it feel different, after, I think, perhaps looking back as he saw it as the excess of '85, sort of a reboot, a fresh start. Everyone was wearing different clothes. They were wearing very, very bright clothes that would work well with cameras. The horns, as you say, Patty and Clarence and so forth in different places. And Bruce, looking in hindsight, actually quite uncomfortable. I remember when he started off wearing these fancy Italian suits, and we just thought, this is not Bruce. This is like some, somebody's dressing him here. He's not really being himself. And in contrast, later, we compared that to the 92-93 tour, where he was so relaxed and obviously so happy. But there were tensions, real tensions. You could tell on the Tunnel tour. I mean, one of the shows I saw, and I was behind the stage, which was an interesting perspective for the first time. He's playing a song, and a fan jumped on stage and ran towards him to grab him. And Bruce literally reached out, grabbed this guy by the shirt in the middle of the song, and flung him, into the arms of security who were rushing on to grab him. And we just kind of went, whoa! We'd never seen that side of him before. It was like everyone was took a moment and stepped back and thought, God, you don't do that. He's not happy now. You don't interrupt Bruce when he's on stage. You think how relaxed he is, obviously, in recent years, inviting people on for Dancing in the Dark. 1988, you didn't do that. With, I think, one exception. There's a great bit of video from somewhere like Toronto, where he just happened to be relaxed enough that he saw a guy. I mean, he was getting people up to do Dancing in the Dark, don't get me wrong. But there was a time and a place for this. You didn't just have a stage invasion. There was a hilarious, as I say, if you can find, if it's on YouTube, look for Toronto 88, where there's this quite tubby guy, but he really moves. He gets a guy on stage for Dancing in the Dark, and that was hilarious. So he started to relax a little bit at times, but mostly there was this tension. And of course, then we found out that, things weren't happy at home. The whole relationship with Patty was taking over and dominating the experience. And it was, like I say, I was lucky to see a cross section. So I saw shows in April, May, June, July, throughout, some in America, some in Europe. And of course, by the end, it was outdoors again. It was, the war horses, the crowd pleasers. We'd lost a lot of the subtlety of early on. But it was interesting to see that evolution. And you think, okay, well, maybe this is what's going to happen in future. Again, that's all we could guess.
And then he kind of disappears for best part of 4 years, really. And you've only really got one sort of notable show, which is the Christic shows.
Oh, yeah.
The Christic shows are two sort of, I believe they were benefit shows.
Yes.
You can pick them up on the sort of the Nugs websites, which are two of my favorite Bruce shows of all time. So it's acoustic. He plays Nebraska materials on there. He actually plays a couple of Human Touch songs on there as well, which are really stripped back, which Real World, which is a song, if you hear it acoustically, you would think, right, this is going to be the next sort of Springsteen, not an epic, but sort of one of those beautiful songs there that are going to be top tier Bruce songs. And then you get sort of Human Touch, which, if I'm honest with you, I find Human Touch and Lucky Town quite an interesting era. Now, I came into Bruce sort of in the 2000s. So by the point that I got into Bruce, the E Street Band was back. The reunion had happened. And it's been great for me because I've been able to experience, I've always known the E Street Band was there. And it's been fun that, like, this year, I really hope Bruce is going to go off and do something acoustic or different. I've really enjoyed Western Stars because I know after Western Stars, you're guaranteed that Letter to You is going to come along. Or you've got sort of, he's very much got in a pattern recently that you get an E Street Band album, you get an E Street Band tour, and then you get Devils and Dust, and then he's doing something there, and then you've got Sega sessions, then you've got Magic. So it's sort of almost that the audience knows, okay, Bruce can go and indulge himself in what he wants to do because we're going to be going back to E Street.
Yeah.
And I find, and especially fans sort of my age, are a lot more interested in Human Touch and Lucky Town as just sort of a bit of a diversion, because we know next year we'll probably be going to see another E Street Band show. But there was a lot of negativity around sort of that band, and sort of saying like, oh, they're almost like tribute acts and bits and pieces like that. And I find I really enjoy listening to a lot of the 92, 93 shows. I would say that I feel that sometimes when they step a little bit too heavily on the E Street material, it does, the 92, 93 band is never going to be able to play the E Street songs to the same level as an E Street song. But those Human Touch and Lucky Town songs live really come alive for me. What was your kind of feeling around Human Touch and Lucky Town, and sort of the rumors that the band had gone and then Bruce was recording with all of these different sort of, like, you got Randy Jackson on there, and you've almost got with Human Touch, and I'm probably you're going to repeat what I'm going to say, is really overly produced and really polished. And then on the other hand, you've got Lucky Town, which is quite gritty and underproduced, and maybe slightly underproduced, even though it's one of my favorite albums as well. So yeah, what was your kind of thinking about that time period there?
Yes, as you say, I think the production was a big part of it. I mean, Real World is a wonderful example, because you take the Christic version, solo acoustic, the first time he's ever played it, and it's just breathtaking and beautiful. And you think, oh yeah, this is the way to go. Just put it out like this.
Yep.
And the version on the album, I think, is kind of disappointing when you've heard the Christic and you've loved that, because it's just, yeah, it kind of lost a lot somehow with the way it was arranged and produced. And yeah, there is this definite difference between Human Touch and Lucky Town. You could kind of, in a way, I often thought you maybe kind of like blend the two together and make one really, really strong album, because some of the songwriting is really strong. I mean, you've got to have Real World, and I always like Roll of the Dice. I remember saying to people in '92, I love Roll of the Dice. It sounds to me like an E Street song, that something that I think people would like more if it was played with the E Street Band. And people kind of at the time shook their heads and said, no, Roll of the Dice just doesn't work. And then when years later he began playing it with the E Street Band, and people were saying, hey, Roll of the Dice with the E Street Band, it's brilliant. It's like, yeah, told you so. But I think he was very much in kind of conflict with himself. It's an experimental period. First time sort of trying things with a band that weren't the E Street Band. And so he didn't quite know what to do. And I remember people saying to me, what is he trying to do? Because he'd brought these soul singers, the backup singers on tour, and people like Sam Moore, and I loved all of that. But live, as you say, he could go from doing an E Street staple like Born to Run, where Crystal, bless her, would try and do Clarence's sax part.
Yeah. And
she could never hope to compete with Clarence. It's like, that they probably should have skipped that, to be honest. He probably just felt he had to play it. But the beginning of the show was very interesting, especially by the time it got to Europe, and he was doing 3 or 4 acoustic songs,
yeah,
which in hindsight was pointing the way towards the Tom Joad approach. But obviously we had no idea at the time. Things like Darkness on the Edge of Town. Who would have imagined Darkness on the Edge of Town could work as an acoustic song?
Yeah. Adam Raised a Cane as well.
Adam Raised a Cane, things like that. Exactly, songs from Darkness that would just sort of reimagined. And I loved some of the covers, like Satan's Jewel Crown.
Yeah.
And that was where the backing singers really came into their own, because that's like pure gospel. And again, people were saying to me, what's he trying to do? He's trying gospel. That's what he's trying to do. Soul Driver, again, was an attempt to sort of kind of go in that direction. So it was like he was trying tentatively different things, and it was a bit of a hodgepodge. It didn't really hold together cohesively, maybe more so with the Lucky Town album. I remember I was at the Badlands convention called Better Days in 1994, and I was on a panel, and one of the questions was, what was the last great Springsteen album? And I said, Lucky Town, because, that was the last really strong thing he did at that point in my mind. And it's, I think it's songs that, he still goes back to things like If I Should Fall Behind.
Yeah.
Living Proof has stood the test of time as a sort of a tribute to his son. But the main image I take away, the main memory I take away from it was, like I say, how relaxed, in contrast to the Tunnel Tour, he was on the 92, 93, especially 93, when things were, he was stretching out, he was trying different things. And even if he hadn't succeeded with whatever the idea was, the sort of rock and soul gospel, whatever you want to call it, idea, he was happy that he'd tried it. And it kind of opened the door for him for the future to try different things. So, yeah, a lot of joyful memories around 1993, especially.
I think this is going to just divert slightly, just because last year we got Tracks 2, which was the Lost albums.
Mm.
And my favorite album out of that was the Streets of Philadelphia sessions, which I think is an absolutely world-class Bruce album. It was my favorite album of the year. And I know I'll put a little post up on sort of our Instagram socials. And a lot of people sort of agreed, in the sense that they were saying, how could he hold this back? But I think you've kind of answered that he was toying with that acoustic sort of sound in 93. And I think there's a lot of people have sort of said that he was almost trying to deconstruct himself, that he'd got himself to the absolute peak that he could be in 1984, 1985. Then slowly in 88, there was the is he going to go out on tour with the band? Is it going to be sort of a stripped down band? And then things were different. Then he jettisons the band. And then when he comes back, originally he's playing with a lot of different session musicians. And then he's played down with a stripped down band for sort of Lucky Town. And then, like you say, he finishes this tour. He releases the Streets of Philadelphia song, which is completely different to most other things in his catalog. He's experimenting with drum loops. And then you've got this mythical album that we've finally got to listen to, which in a parallel universe, it would have been interesting to see how he would have toured that. Whether, do you feel the Streets of Philly album would have worked acoustically, or do you think he would have had to take sort of some version of the 93 band back on tour?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And knowing that the next thing he did was Tom Joad, and I think there had been rumors that he might have considered doing the Joad tour with one or two extra musicians, but maybe they tested it out and it never really worked to his satisfaction. But yeah, thinking about, as you say, now that we've got those missing links in place, thanks to Tracks 2, we can see that, yeah, 94, 95 might have been a very different time if he'd put the album out. I think he could have taken it on tour. It would have had to be, indoors, small scale, maybe just, again, maybe just a couple of extra musicians, maybe not totally solo. He did, at one point, Bruce was using Kevin, his guitar tech, to play a little bit of keyboard off stage.
Yeah.
So you can argue that it wasn't a totally solo show even then, in like 96, 97, to something that he needed to do. And you think forward to, just briefly, to Devils and Dust, when he would do Dream Baby Dream. And it took me a moment to realize that at one point, when he finishes the song and he sort of came forward to sort of, he left his keyboard behind and was sort of at the microphone or whatever. And I just suddenly thought to myself, hang on, who's playing the music? It's like he's singing, but there's music going on and nobody actually else on stage. So again, part of his magic trick. But yeah, it would have been fascinating to have a 94 or 95 tour with the Streets of Philadelphia sessions taken on the road. But it might have taken him in different directions. Who knows where that would have led to next? Would it have led to Sega sessions? Who knows?
I think the one thing about that album for me is the guitar work. And Shane Fontaine, who was the sort of the guitarist or lead guitarist on the 92-93 tour, he gets a few songs there to really shine. And Zach Alford as well, some of his drum fills. And I think that's one thing, just to put a sort of a cap on that 92-93 period. A lot of people don't realize that the band that Bruce went out on tour with was not the band that he recorded with. So these new sort of, well, say the new album, the Streets of Philly sessions, it was fantastic to kind of hear that evolution because they've been out playing with Bruce for sort of 2 years. And then they've finally got to record, and you get some validation for that band because there's some really nice guitar work in that album, and I think there's some really strong songwriting as well. I think a lot of people have sort of said the reason that it didn't get put out was that it would have been the third sort of relationship based album that Bruce had released on the Bounce.
Yep.
So you can almost see that actually is he flogging a dead horse here? In my eyes, no, because I think it's a stronger album in my eyes than sort of these other two early 90s output. But in reality, he put it on the shelf. And then you guys got Ghost of Tom Joad, which is real stripped back storytelling. It's another really interesting album to listen to because it's not the same sort of storytelling which was going on in Nebraska. There's a lot more sort of political or social consciousness sort of going on, and you've also got the first of sort of talking about sort of other cultures because we're looking at sort of like what's going on in Mexico, sort of like borders and things like that. So I imagine that was quite a different album to give a spin to. And obviously when Bruce comes out on tour there, he's got a goatee, he's got sort of quite a troubadour-y quite kind of look. I imagine that was quite a difference from 10 years ago when he's sort of stood Wembley, like you say, white shirt, blue jeans, bandana and muscles.
Yes, it was hard to believe that this is the same Bruce, as you say, kind of reinventing himself yet again, and almost like a sort of David Bowie way. And it was one thing to absorb the album, which I very much embraced. I did like the songs, and realizing that this is very much him reflecting his Californian experience because by that point he had his second home in California, and I was impressed that he'd taken the time to really explore and soak up local history, local politics, local sociology, and to bring all that to songs which demanded your attention. It was a challenge to the audience. It's like this isn't music to sing along to. This isn't music to dance to. It's music that makes you, much like Nebraska, you have to sit down. You have to really shut off distractions, pay attention. Ideally, have the lyrics with you.
Yeah.
And that's something that I also have been saying more recently about Inyo. Inyo feels much the same. That you really have to concentrate on this to get the best out of it. And so there was this question of like, how is this going to work live? We'd seen the few acoustic songs that he'd opened the previous tour with, and that was the only clue we had. But I was lucky because I got to go to, coincidentally, purely by coincidence, Germany again to see the show before it came to the UK, and I got to see a couple of shows out there. And so Bruce came on and solo in the spotlight, and everyone's cheering and going nuts. And he's immediately trying to shut it down. He's immediately saying, "Okay, sort of calm down, shut the fuck up. You need to pay attention to this." And he kind of laughed about it a little bit, but at the same time, you knew he was deadly serious. Nobody was going to be jumping on stage for this.
Yeah.
And I also remember that very first show, I thought, okay, wow, I'm getting instructions here. I actually sat on my hands for some of the songs just to sort of remind myself, don't start applauding or whooping or reacting. It's like you've got to pay attention. It's like we're having a lecture here almost. We're serious, Bruce. But it was riveting, and it did require extended concentration. People sometimes joked about what they call the stool set in the middle of the show, where Bruce literally sits on a stool, and those are the ones that are the most sort of intense and thoughtful. And maybe that wasn't to everyone's taste, but you go through that, and then you've got songs like "Across the Border," which is one of my favorites from the album.
Fantastic song.
Always beautiful live, and just again, it's something positive after some of the bleakness you had earlier on. What are we without hope in our hearts? It's that message again, and that was another tour that was interesting. That it evolves over. It was actually almost 3 years. It started in 95 and then
Yep.
finished in 97, so 2.5 years or whatever. It's by the time he got to the end, he was incorporating new arrangements of earlier songs. He was more playful and relaxed. It was very, very different from, like 12 months before or whatever, the first show and the last show I saw. So even on his own, there was this evolution going on with what we thought was going to be a very, very structured, unchanging set. Although things did change a little bit. We know you had the introduction of a couple of experiments that he did along the way. And when it came to a stand like at the Royal Albert Hall, where you had multiple shows, he was obviously prepared to change things. He recognized that this is still a hardcore of fans. It's going to be the same people coming to a degree each night. We got something as rare as the Angel, for example, which is just, still boggles the mind. And I know I learnt since then that I didn't know at the time, but that was all thanks to someone who's now a friend of mine. He sneaked into the hall and actually spoke to Bruce at the sound check and said, "What about the Angel?" And he played it, so something that you just really thought wouldn't have been on his radar at the time, even though I think it was a clever choice because it's a song that did lend itself to being solo acoustic.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And the brief diversion from that, in St. Patrick's Day 96, we went to Dublin, and we'd had a tip-off just before that, seeing a Joe Ely show. Joe Ely was obviously mates with Bruce, and they said, "You got to come to Dublin for our St. Patrick's show. You got to come. It's going to be really special." And a friend of mine sort of followed this up, and I eventually thought, yeah, this is going to be worth a try. It was quite bizarre because it meant that we would actually be doing 2 trips to Dublin, go for the St. Patrick's weekend, back to work, and then come back and see Bruce's official show. But I thought, what the hell? This has got to be worth a shot. And we were very lucky because Bruce turned up with Joe Ely. And the funny thing was that it's as if he came on dressed in his Tom Joad gear, like he hadn't packed anything else. He was sort of in tour mode to look at. But for most of the show, he'd had his hair kind of slicked back. And there was a funny picture earlier. I think it was taken from the One Step Up video, possibly, where there's a scene in a bar and Bruce is kind of made up to look like he's an old man.
Yeah.
So in 1988, he was kind of sort of envisaging how he might look years later. And the thing that struck me about the way he dressed and looked, the Troubadour, as you mentioned, in 96, was it's like he's deliberately trying to age himself gracefully in a deliberate way, knowing that, it's partly a sort of getting into character with the goatee and everything and the hair. So when he stepped on stage for Joe Ely, it was like the only relaxation he did to that look was that he let his hair kind of go all floppy. It wasn't slicked back. And it was so exciting to see him actually strap on an electric guitar for the first time, as far as we were concerned, in that entire tour. Because as much as we loved the acoustic stuff, like, hey, Bruce is electric again. And just having fun. He literally let his hair down in both ways. So I was very lucky to catch that, and very happy for my friends, because Bruce traditionally had hardly ever played any surprise shows in Europe. Very, very few. And that was one instance where several of my friends got that privilege to see that over here in Europe. So a very interesting tour, and yet again left us thinking, what's going to happen next?
I suppose that's where you get then 98, you get Tracks.
Yep.
Must have been nice to hear some of those songs that almost become legendary at that point. And then you start getting rumors that the E Street Band, are going to go back out on tour. And then 1999, you get the band back. I imagine that was an experience seeing them again. Did you think that you were going to be seeing the band back sort of throughout the 90s? Did you have an inkling that there would be a reunion on the cards? Because it wasn't like Guns N' Roses, where you've got Axl and Slash flinging mud at one another and court cases and bits and pieces. I know Gary Tallon wasn't particularly happy around sort of, I guess, just to jump in, going back to 95, there was a greatest hits that was released and the band got back together. They recorded Secret Garden, Murder Incorporated, a couple of other tracks around that time, done a couple of like little promo shows, and then that was it. But there was, what was it like come 99? Was there a real buzz? I can remember as a kid seeing on Newsround on BBC One. It's probably the first memory I've got of Springsteen was the E Street Band getting back together. And I can't remember whether it was the first show or maybe it could have been sort of the Madison Square Garden controversy. But I can remember on Newsround seeing Bruce on there and thinking, who's this guy then? So, yeah, what was your feelings around about 99?
It was an interesting time because I was one of those people, one of the fans that actually never really accepted that the band had been fired, because this was the phrase that was being bandied about ever since they took a break, and it's Bruce has fired the band. Bruce has fired. I thought my instinct was always that it was a break. It was a break. So I kind of think I certainly hoped, if I didn't have any insider information, I just kind of hoped that I think there's a chance for them to reunite. I couldn't see why he wouldn't, and I think again in hindsight the fact that we realized he's experimenting with different things means that maybe by that logic sooner or later one experiment will be to reunite the band.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started a new job when he kicked off in Europe and in Barcelona. And a bunch of my friends were going, and I suddenly realized, hey, I'm missing out here. I had real sort of fear of missing out, and managed to persuade my boss to give me some time off very early on after starting. Saying, I just want to go for a couple of days to Spain, and caught up with my friends. And I was, it was literally a case of, I know it's late, but we can make it if we run. I got there and just in time for the shows, and a friend of mine over there had managed to keep a couple of tickets for me. And because it was absolutely mental, as you can imagine, the Spanish audiences, and the beginning of the tour, and there was news coverage about that at the time. It was a real thrill to see them all back on stage, and not just the guys we'd seen last time on the Tunnel tour, but Stevie. And that, I think, was for people like me who'd seen him in '81, especially. It's like, now this is what it's all about. This is what we want. No disrespect to Nils, but Stevie was the original right-hand man for me. And to see them all together, because that was a question. I don't think we knew until we saw that. It's like, is it going to be Nils? Is it going to be Stevie? Is it going to be both of them? Is it going to be anybody else? You still didn't really have a lot of information in advance at that point. And so that was absolutely fantastic. And again, we're lucky that there's stuff on YouTube. It takes you back to that feeling of like, all's well with the world. This is the E Street Band Plus playing My Love Will Not Let You Down. And that spoke volumes as a choice to open the tour. It's like, they're back, and they're back for us. Again, people were not always convinced that this was a permanent reunion. A lot of people thought that this is, it's one-off. He's done the Hall of Fame thing. He's done the tracks. It's it could have been as temporary as the Greatest Hits reunion. But again, I always felt this is a new era. And Bruce himself would make a point of saying, we're reinvigorated, we're rededicated. I think that was an important word, and he deliberately, repeated that again and again. In other words, we're here for the long term. This is an ongoing reunion, and that went through to 2000 and the final shows at Madison Square Garden, where he did Blood Brothers.
Yep.
And that could not have been a more vivid way of saying, look at us, we're here holding hands on stage, we're reunited, we're here for you. It's not goodbye. I mean, people were sad because it was the end of the tour, but I just thought, no, this is just another chapter, and there's going to be more chapters. So I think, again, there was some expectation that they would do more from tracks. I don't think I ever really imagined that they would really dip into that in a serious way. It was never called the Tracks Tour. Tracks was almost just sort of like a coincidence, in as much as it was like it was a way of reintroducing, some material and some alternative material, which I thought was the way to go. And of course, in hindsight, we can see that with tracks too, that even more of an extent of that. But although his newest material was, things like Land of Open Dreams at that point, again, that kind of became a sort of hallmark for the tour. It also sort of reinforced that idea that this is what we're going to do for now. You can count on us for more of this. And so, although I welcomed all the little changes whenever he did do a track song, it was like, oh, great, how fantastic to have something rare and special. But it was just about, celebrating the fact that they were together. And I was convinced that, we're going to have more of the same.
And then come 2002, you could walk into a record shop and pick up a new Bruce and the E Street Band album, which is the first time you can really have done that properly since, I don't think you really count sort of the greatest hits. So since sort of 1984. How had it changed picking up a Bruce record then? Do you think there was more buzz around there? I mean, I can remember The Rising coming out, and I remember, because it's so entwined with 9/11, that it being sort of one of those last big albums for me that seemed to be on TV, that there was a lot of sort of Grammy buzz. But yeah, kind of, what was your feelings around when The Rising dropped?
Yeah, I think you're right that it probably was maybe one of the last ones to make a big splash in the media at the time. And they did. They were doing shows specifically sort of aimed at that. They had film crews come down to Asbury Park.
Yeah.
They did that show at was it the Planetarium? I forget exactly, for MTV Awards or something like that.
Yeah.
So it was very much building on the fact that the previous tour had been just reassembling, rededicating, whatever you want to call it. And then it was like, as you say, yes, okay, now we have some brand new material. And it's extraordinary to think that, if the legend is true, that it was very much inspired by, one guy in a car seeing Bruce on the street and saying, "Bruce, we need you."
Yeah.
And you do wonder if, would he have pursued it otherwise? I mean, to be fair, the same thing seems to have happened with Letter to You, in as much as Bruce was having some sort of writing block later at that point. And one particular fan had given him a guitar, and he always says that, that particular guitar somehow unlocked his writing process for what became Letter to You.
Yep.
So it's extraordinary to think that, one little gesture by a fan can, open up something that's an entire album, an entire tour, a whole new chapter. And it goes without saying that 9/11 obviously made a huge impact. He could go out to a local vantage point and actually see the smoke coming from the Twin Towers. He was that close, and he knew the community around there, that everyone was affected. It was very close to home, not just as an American, but as a guy from New Jersey, and knowing people in New York and New Jersey. So that was, and I think it was a remarkable achievement to make an album that you look at it, you play it back now, and you don't think with every song, oh my God, it's so much of its time, it's so much 9/11. It's an album that has transcended that. And I think, look at My City of Ruins, a wonderful example. How many different applications he's found for that over the years, different places, different causes. May have started originally being about Asbury Park, but it applied to New York, it applied to Christchurch, it applied to all sorts of instances and places that he played. And again, a song that he's revisited and still comes back to. So the fact that these things have stood the test of time, it could easily have been an album that was just of its time and virtually abandoned. You think how rarely he plays songs from Tunnel of Love these days.
Yep.
You'll get Tougher Than the Rest. You very occasionally get something like Brilliant Disguise, but most of that, he seems to, in his mind, it seems to be like that was of its time, I don't need to go back to that often, even though it's much loved, and obviously people would have loved more revisiting of that. Whereas many of the Rising songs are still feel very current. And
Yeah, you just look at the last tour. You've got Lonesome Day, The Rising.
exactly.
Obviously, you had the fireman that was killed in the Trump assassination attempt, and it
Yeah,
brings out Into the Fire.
exactly.
It is a timeless album. I always say, and I'm a big Bon Jovi fan. In 2020, Bon Jovi put an album out called 2020, which was about the pandemic, and lots of songs about sort of wearing masks and sort of like hospitals and all of this sort of thing. And I can't listen to the album because it takes me back to a time that I don't really want to remember. None of us have got fond memories of 2020. So why do I want to listen to songs there that are so literal about a pandemic? Whereas The Rising is one of my favorite albums. And even though it's so interconnected with 9/11, it's done in a clever way. And what's beautiful about it is what as well, it's not an aggressive album.
No.
It's an album that actually embraces a lot of world music as well. It's a very inclusive album. So if you listen to a song like Worlds Apart, which I think is
I
a
love that.
fantastic song,
Yeah, I love it.
and especially live as well, there's a really cool, if you listen to, I think there's a version that you guys got at Wembley Arena,
Yes.
and there's an extended guitar solo on that. There's a Crystal Cat bootleg of that. It's absolutely fantastic. And that's what I think about that album. It's such an inclusive album, and it's fresh sounding even now. I know we spoke about Born in the USA. Born in the USA is a classic album, but it's of its times. You can hear
Yep.
that synthesizer, the
True.
drum noises. The Rising, a song like Lonesome Day would fit on the radio now. It's timeless. Brendan O'Brien, I think, is a fantastic producer, and I think it was a really good move where they sort of, it sounds E Street, but it's not going down a route of sort of what we expected E Street to sound. And then we sort of move on from that. You then drop back into the sort of the Devils and Dust. So Devils and Dust was originally written alongside or songs that came from the Ghost of Tom Joad period and the Inyo period now. So we kind of know that there was kind of 3 albums in that 96, 97 period that Bruce was writing on the road. Devils and Dust, obviously, there was some newer songs on there as well. And you also got to experience sort of, again, a more stripped back Bruce there as well. So I imagine that was quite nice after you've had 2 sort of really powerful E Street sort of tours to then go back and experience. And these shows, Bruce was pulling out rarity after rarity. You look at some of the set lists and songs that were performed, like we spoke about Walk Like a Man. That was the first time since 1988 that he played that. And you never knew what you was going to get on that tour. And I imagine that was quite a nice experience as well, walking into a building and not knowing what you're going to get day to day, or show to show, I should say.
Yes, I was. I went back to the Albert Hall for the 2 London shows, and one of my regrets about that tour, if you like, is that I didn't try and see more. I probably could have seen more shows at the time, given that, like with the Joe tour, it actually extended over quite a period of time. And as you say, it evolved again towards the end, where he was even more relaxed and loose and playing unusual covers. I mean, something like Zero and Blind Terry, for example. I mean, nobody saw that coming later in those shows, or jamming with Clarence and Stevie, which you couldn't have imagined happening on the Joe tour. But I was very happy with the shows I saw at the Royal Albert Hall, because we had Cautious Man, which is one of my favourites that I'd never seen live. I was just sort of totally happy to get that. At this point, I'm kind of like looking for rarities to tick off, as you can imagine. And so that was a real highlight. And again, I think we had Real World, which was back to the acoustic piano, and something that I thought in 92 and 93, we're probably never going to get this the way it was done at the Christic show. But to return to that, that was definitely a highlight. And even though sets were probably fairly similar from night to night. Just an absolutely wonderful period. I think if you go to something like, is it the VH1 Storytellers?
Yep.
There's a DVD which gives you a taste of that time. I think there was plans to release an entire show rather than just that little showcase, but that sadly never happened. Well, who knows? It might appear down the road. But yeah, I've always found solo Bruce intriguing and fascinating, and yeah, as I say, I probably would have liked to have seen more at that time. And little did we know that Sega Sessions was was around the corner, because that we definitely didn't see coming.
And I think that's quite a funny thing for me. At this point was when I was sort of discovering Bruce and dipping in and out of different albums. So I'd heard The Rising, I'd heard some of the back catalogue, and then this album come out, and I was like, no, what is this? What is it? I was interested in Green Day and bits and pieces, and unfortunately for me, that stalled my Bruce fan of that album did. Now I quite enjoy listening to it. I listened to it the other day. I have to be in the mood for shows, but you were very, very lucky. You actually got the world premiere of one of my all-time favorite Bruce songs at Wembley, which was Long Walk Home, with
Oh yes,
slightly alternative lyrics, which that is just to have that sort of on your Bruce bingo cards. You managed to get that. I think that must have been an amazing, because legend says that he wrote it sort of that evening or that afternoon, and then just decided to play it. And that's what amazes me when you think about writing a song, and writing a song of such quality of Long Walk Home, and then just said, I'm going to play that tonight. Like,
well yes, because the story I heard was a couple of friends of mine had the sense to go to see Lucinda Williams, who was playing in London in a theatre just a day or two before, around those shows, and for whatever reason I skipped that. My mistake. Bruce came on, played guitar, just stood there with a baseball cap. Nobody, I think, really made too much of a fuss. He obviously wanted to just play it low key, but I believe he then credited her for inspiring him, because I think she tried something new that night or whatever.
yeah.
Or maybe was in the habit of doing that. I wasn't really paying attention at the time, but I'm sure he said that. Yeah, it was because he realized that she could do that. It reminded him that he could do it, and so yeah, he says this is like a work in progress. He even called it, I think, "Gonna Be a Long Walk Home." He hadn't even finalized the title at that point. I remember I was lucky because I had a pretty good spot close to the stage, and I had my camera with me, and I was just thinking, oh, I wonder if I should video this. And I was bringing my camera up, and there was a security guy in front of me, and just caught my eye, and he just looked at me and just shook his head. Don't even think about it, mate. So I said, okay, fair enough. I put it away, and I just enjoyed the song. But that was around the time I'd started to do a few videos and things. And also, interestingly, I think that was one of the first times that there was the experience of a kind of pit at Bruce shows. People probably assume that's been there forever, but it wasn't really until around that time. And even though it was different because it was indoors in an arena, that was something that we really discovered on the Magic Tour, and the huge advantage that would be if you could get into the pit, and in terms of viewpoint and comfort and all that kind of thing. But yeah, that was I loved the sessions tours, because I mean there were effectively two really, slightly different, and but you had to be open to that very, very different kind of music, not E Street style at all. And a lot of people just didn't get it. They really didn't get it. But it was very joyful. It was very remarkable, given that it's one of those times where you had a lot of musicians on stage, and Bruce seemed to sort of conduct them almost effortlessly. When you think how complex some of those musical routines were. Yep. He'd get the horn players to sort of do this interplay now and then, which meant that they're kind of almost playing different parts, and yet he just knows that they're good enough that they can actually make it work. It'll sound like jazz. It won't sound like a car crash. And stretching things out, again, the way he would do reinventions of his own songs. I mean, there was like a kind of ska version of Blinded by the Light.
Yeah.
But remember, we just shook our heads and looked at each other and thought, how did he ever think to do that? It's phenomenal. And covers like Love of the Common People. There's a version of Atlantic City in there somewhere. So if you were open to it, there was a lot to be enjoyed, but it really did divide people. And I'm sure that there was a huge relief when the E Street Band reconvened the next year.
And I think the biggest turning point for me in sort of my Bruce fandom was the next song that he put out, which was Radio Nowhere, which just hit me completely at that right point of loud guitars, loud drums. And I remember it coming on, and it was one of the music channels. I don't even know if it was Kerrang back in the time that played it, because at that point I finished school, come home, stick on all the music channels, and then just heard this like, and it was the guitar and then Clarence's saxophone coming in, and it just sounded so fresh and so cool that all I would do is just turn my telly up as loud as it would possibly go, because it would be the way to listen to it. And I thought, wow, what is this? And that was a point there that sort of like the internet sort of really obviously kicked off. There was the message board, so got myself onto sort of the Greasy Lake message board and Backstreets, and then hearing sort of the buzz about sort of the album as well. And then Magic was the first sort of Bruce album that I brought day of release, and I was like, wow, this is an album that, like I say, I was big Bon Jovi fan, and there was a album Lost Highway that they'd put out, which I was really fond of. That just immediately got ejected, thrown to the back seat. Magic went in, and I don't think Magic since 2000 and well, that's 2007 has ever not been played regularly. Whether it's in my car now, like it's one of my go-to albums. My wife, when I was sort of introducing her to Bruce, that was the first album like that she kind of fell in love with and sort of said, okay, I get this. Devil's Arcade is her favorite Bruce song. And I just think from start to finish that album is just fantastic. I will niggle on the production, that I do think it suffers a little bit from sort of the compression wars.
Yeah.
That everything is turned way up. And it is an album that I listen to my Bruce on albums on vinyl now. The vinyl is better than sort of CD. I would love a remaster of the album just because it is just so compressed and so, in one way it's cool because it is in your face. You do feel like you are stood in front of those guitar amps and it is hitting you in the face. But sometimes it is a little bit on the shrill side, which it's almost that wall of sound that was going on for Born to Run, where Born to Run, it worked beautifully because it was not compressed to hell.
Yep.
Whereas this time, it's the wrong way of doing it. And it's frustrating because next album that come out of the gate, Working on a Dream, I think they learned their lessons, and that's a lot easier to listen to. What were your views on Magic when Magic sort of dropped?
Yeah, I remember I was with a friend who just happened to be visiting when we had somebody sent us a kind of like an advance link to listen to. I think it was just like snippets of it somehow. You just get a little taste of it. And I remember her reaction when we listened to Devil's Arcade together, and she said, "Oh, that's a woman's song. That's a song for women to enjoy." And you say, your wife's favorite. And I totally recognize that. I went. I think my favorite was immediately Long Walk Home, partly because we'd recognized it from Wembley from the previous tour, and it's like, oh wow, this is what he's done with it. That worked, and I think talking about the production actually worked well with that, because there was a lot of light and shade in the song, whereas something like Radio Nowhere is just so full on, and yeah, there's some shrillness, as you say, but I really loved when they translated Long Walk Home live yet again on the Magic tour, because there was a sort of drawn out version with Stevie.
Yes, yeah.
Doing being Stevie in the middle of the song, which I thought was so inspired and just added so much to the song. And it's a real shame, I think, that he hasn't done that since.
Yeah.
That kind of only seemed to exist, for that brief period. But yeah, magic is amongst people I've talked to. I think magic is often kind of overlooked or underrated, and it's a shame because it is. Yeah, it's a very very strong album. Again, something like "Living in the Future,"
Yeah.
which you could relate at the time to like the Bush administration or
Yep.
whoever it was, and yet somehow it's still so relevant today. I think so. He has that genius of writing things that are not time bound and not just restricted, limited to being of their time. Like it's as if he realized, yeah, this is something that we'll have to revisit. It's going to happen again and again, sleeping through changes. And yeah, it would be great to have a remaster, as you say. Yeah, I'd really, really welcome that. And it makes you wonder what someone like Ron Aniello could do if he was let loose on it.
I'll let you in a little nugget. So,
Okay.
across the years, I have spoken to Ron. So,
Oh, great.
in lockdown, I had some questions about different Bruce things, and I thought, you know what, he's interactive with fans. I'm going to DM him. Actually, no, that's a lie. So it was before lockdown, because it was around about when Western Stars was coming out, and
Yes.
so DM'd him during that kind of period there. And then when Letter to You came out, I was chatting away and sort of saying like that this is for me was almost since the River, this is the best that I think the band have sounded on an album. It sounds like the E Street Band Letter to You for me did. And so I was sort of talking about ghosts and things like this to him. And actually spoke to him on release day. So we were all in lockdown. He was in lockdown with Bruce. And I sort of said, oh, so listen to the album. Absolutely love it. World class album. All of this. I was like, how are you celebrating? And he sent me a picture. He said, I'm sat outside in a field with a gentleman and we're both having a tequila. And he sent me a picture of a tequila bottle and two shot glasses.
Oh, brilliant.
And I just said, please thank Bruce for this album because I needed this album at this point. And my wife at that point was like, oh, say, can I call you and speak to Bruce? And I didn't have the balls to do it because I was like, they're obviously enjoying a moment. It's fantastic that Ron, on the day of release, has sort of responded to me and sent me
Yeah.
that little picture. And to know what Bruce was doing at that point when the album come out was just brilliant. And Ron
Very
is
cool.
such a cool guy, and he's always open to talking about different bits and pieces. Like he dropped nuggets to me where he was sort of saying with Western Stars. So the musical interlude in the middle of Western Stars, the song was supposed to be double in length. So he's told me bits and pieces like that, which then
Right.
you're like, can you send it to me, Ron? No, sorry. um,
Oh yeah. Imagine getting a hold of Ron's laptop. I mean, that would be
oh,
the gold mine,
it'd
wouldn't
be
it?
amazing. But yeah, I did say to him about that, and he said actually that is his number one request from any Bruce fan that he sort of says, but Bruce won't entertain the idea that that's how he wanted the album to be at that point. That's how music was at that point. And I think we spoke earlier on about sort of Darkness on the Edge of Town in 2009 when they were building the box set around that. Stevie went to Bruce. I had Robert Lawson on the podcast. Me and Robert were talking about different bits and pieces to do with what Stevie had been up to. And Stevie had gone to Bruce and said, please let me remix Darkness. And Bruce wouldn't. So no, it's done. The fans have listened to it this way for 30 odd years.
Mm.
I'm not going to go do it. That was one of Stevie's things that he wanted to do. I always feel that magic gets a little bit lost because we kind of got into a period in sort of 2000, really from sort of like Devils and Dust, where we were getting releases and a mini tour. So you got Devils and Dust 2005, and then we go into Sega Sessions 2006, Magic 2007, Working on a Dream in 2009, where it was almost every other year Bruce was out there. There was new music, there was new material, which for us as fans was amazing. But at the same time, albums could disappear very quickly because then you go straight into Working on a Dream. And Working on a Dream for me, I enjoy the album. I think it's very much you could see what Bruce was doing, especially now that we know that he was working on Western Stars and Twilight Hours at that
Yeah,
period. It's very sort of like Beach Boys kind of like that kind of production, and it was almost dipping into that sort of Jimmy Webb type
very much.
70s sort of pop. I can't say that I can't not like Outlaw Pete because my little girl loved the storybook. So that was the first Bruce song that she knows front to back because we had the storybook.
Yeah.
Working on a Dream, I liked the song for what it was. It was a little bit lightweight, but there is one song on there, two on there, Kingdom of Days
Yeah.
and The Wrestler, which I just think are two absolutely fantastic songs.
Wonderful.
Was it Tomorrow Never Knows?
That's one of them on there.
That's another one that live I didn't think it came off, but I enjoy that on the album. My Lucky Day was another one when that dropped obviously as a single that I thought this is fun. It was a 3-minute poppy rocky sort of song. Just to shout out another podcast, sort of the Number the Brave podcast with Hal and Flynn. They often talk about sort of Magic having a real sort of cohesive theme. They were quite short shows, sort of 2 hours, 2.5 hour shows, real strong narrative. And you'd have that pack there of sort of like Long Walk Home, Badlands, The Rising, Last to Die, Devil's Arcade as sort of like a 5-pack. Whereas when you got sort of the Working on a Dream tour, that's when it kind of, you could never get a show out of that material. And then we had sort of the Glastonbury performance. I loved the Glastonbury performance. But it almost felt at that point that we were then getting full album shows that they were special, but they were kind of like not what I was expecting from Bruce. What was your feelings on sort of 2009? And obviously it was special because it was the last time we'd get to see Clarence on stage.
Yes, and of course no one knew that at the time, so that was very much a thing in hindsight. But yeah, I was grateful that I had the opportunity to go to a few shows around that time. In my memory, things kind of run together: 2007, 2008, 2009. It almost felt like one long tour, even though obviously there were 2 albums involved. I really loved the rare moments we would get something like Kingdom of Days or The Wrestler live, because again, I thought they worked really, really well live. And I did welcome Bruce's, again, you could say it was another experiment, that the way that he was trying to be more, a bit more operatic with his voice. One song that really, really divided people was Queen of the Supermarket, which I absolutely loved because I thought, partly just the way he was sort of stretching himself vocally to do that, but also in terms of the subject matter, it really hit home for me as one of those examples where I thought he's really tapped into what it's like for someone to be in that situation where, you know, you're out somewhere and you see somebody, and somebody, you know, just that vision of someone just really grabs your attention. I always also think of, I don't know if you know the Counting Crows song, Long December, where the song goes, you know, the way that light attaches to a girl. So I think it's an absolutely beautiful lyric. And for me, although it's a mundane setting, Bruce's character seeing this woman in a supermarket, but the way she lights up the room when she smiles. And I just think the way he does that, I just thought that was just so effective. And I remember him playing it live in Finland, and it was a request from one of my friends. And Bruce says, "Well, nobody ever asks for this song." You know, he kind of knew that it had divided people, but he just pulled it off. He did a solo acoustic version of it, and it was just glorious. So there's a lot of different material on there, and I do relate it, like you say, again in hindsight, to things like, I mean, I love what he did with Western Stars. I love the vocals primarily, I think, on Twilight Hours, because that's what sets Twilight Hours apart from all the other albums in tracks too. It's like he can just soar with his vocals. It's like, yeah, he's really stretching with that, and he hadn't really done a lot of that before. It's like Western Stars, but in a more urban setting, with Max's drummers. That's the big difference. You don't have Max's drummers on Western Stars, and that adds a very different flavor and drama to that sort of singing. So I really like that, yeah, Orbison, Beach Boys, torch singing style that he very occasionally, of course, he's done falsetto. You think of Lift Me Up, probably one of my all-time favorite songs, and could have gladly taken an entire falsetto album. I'm not sure many people would have done, but I really, really love his falsetto vocals and when he stretches out and opens up. So that was what was special. And I got to see the last time that Clarence played in Europe, which was in Santiago in 2009. I almost didn't make it because I was really deathly ill that day. For some reason, I just had like a real bad experience of whatever was happening. Maybe it's something I'd eaten or whatever. And I was literally sort of like curled up in my hotel room, feeling like death warmed up. And then suddenly, I just thought, an hour or two before the show, I just suddenly thought, oh, I'm feeling better. Maybe I can still make it. And my friends had all gone ahead, and I told them I don't think I can make it, but I jumped in a taxi and rushed off to the venue, which is this bizarre kind of outdoor amphitheater in the middle of nowhere. And we got to see some fantastic stuff. We had, I think, Burning Love was played, and a very bizarre setting, kind of little bit like Slain in terms of the chaos and so on, the lack of organization, but an absolutely brilliant show. And yeah, when we look back, and of course a year or so later, and realized, oh my goodness, that was the last time we saw Clarence. So it's kind of something that I have mixed feelings about. The experience of being unwell was really horrible. But at the same time, I wouldn't have missed it. So I count myself lucky.
I think that might be a good place just to pause now, because like Dan says, we did lose Clarence shortly after. We'd lost Danny during the Magic Tour. And then when Bruce came back in 2012, things were different. So as long as you're happy, Dan, I think we'll pause there. And then I'll meet back up with Dan in February, and we'll talk through the Wrecking Ball, the River Reunion Tour. We'll talk through sort of Western Stars, Letter to You, the rest of the tracks box set, and Nebraska, the expanded edition. And I want to get Dan's opinion on 2025 and what he may think 2026 holds. So thank you for joining me for part one then, Dan. And then we'll meet up again early February for part two.
Sounds great, Jamie. This has been fun. So yeah, there's a lot still to cover. Let's reconvene.
Perfect.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to my daddy's channel.